Okay. Greetings. Welcome to the Captive Desk. I would like to also welcome this evening Andrew to the Captive Desk. Welcome, Andrew.
Hello, anyone listening?
We should be on. Let me see. Yep. All right. Looks like we're
Looks like
on.
we're live.
All right, good deal. Okay, so Andrew, why don't you give us a little introduction about yourself?
Yeah, so I guess my name's Andrew. I go by Irrational Empiricist over on some other channels. Currently a college student trying to work my way up. Um, Interested in, I guess, all sorts of topics, cosmology, biology, geology. I'm a jack of all trades, at least in terms of the basics of some of the subjects. So, um, and yeah, I just like communicating my passion about this stuff to others and dealing with, let's just say, misinformation on the internet about evolution and Big Bang cosmology and stuff like that. So that's what I'm into.
Great. All right. And I know I see you over on Mike's channel a lot at
Oh
Answers in
yeah,
Atheism.
yep. Answers in atheism.
Is there any other channels you like to frequent a lot where people can find you? Or
I used to be on uh some other ones. I guess mainly creationist ones where I do debates and stuff, or well, discussions and stuff, but not so much anymore with the workload. And well, I guess they're not really posting that much anymore, thank goodness, in some respects.
well, maybe you shut down all their arguments. They didn't have anything left.
I hope we did. Well, you can't be terribly optimistic, but I'm like a lot of stuff I've seen now is mostly on Bible theology related topics. So I don't know, maybe we did get them, or at least influence their followers. You know what I mean?
Hopefully, always
Some
hopefully.
people on the fence, perhaps.
I'm all for it.
Yeah.
So I wanted to bring you on, and yeah, I wanted to ask you a few questions about a lot of the anti-science problems we have. It seems to be like a trend now, where it's like
Yeah.
pick another team, and it's let's poke at the scientists.
Right.
And
Yeah.
you and I both
Yeah.
know. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just yeah. I like the way you put it, picking the opposite team basically, and I don't know. I guess makes it's kind of the American thing to do. I shouldn't generalize, but it is kind of the American thing to do to uh, poke at the established authority, in this case, the scientific consensus, or I don't know. Maybe it also makes people feel like they're the next Galileo, you know what I mean? Like they're the lone person out there who knows the truth. I don't know, whatever their motivations may be.
You think it's people have just always had that idea, or is it just something that that maybe with the internet or something where they just think, hey, I can be a scientist too? Or
I'm betting it's probably predates the internet, but the internet certainly didn't help. Especially with like I can name an example with some misinformation about the James Webb Space Telescope and how it supposedly debunks all of standard cosmology. Um, and it
right,
kind of went,
I saw
yeah,
the articles,
yeah,
right?
went kind of viral, or well, semi-viral on Twitter and other social media platforms. So that's a good example of that, and I guess how common that's become lately.
And then with the internet too, the problem is that just anybody can see it and they
Right,
repost it, they repeat it, they retweet
right,
it,
exactly, yeah,
and there's absolutely no vetting, and it'll go right on up. You hear it from politicians and everything.
right, yeah. That's
Somebody
I guess you could summarize it as the internet doesn't have a peer review process, and that's probably a bad thing in this particular area.
Mhm.
Which I'm not saying peer review is by any means perfect. Like no one thinks it's a perfect system, but if someone out there has a better way of doing things, I mean, like the internet certainly isn't one of them. Just reposting things, like you said.
Right. And then you absolutely have the people who will say that, well, I didn't vet it, I just retweeted it, and we heard that from our last president.
Oh yeah, yeah. Especially the politicians, like you said.
And I was talking with you before we started it that Mike Pence was or is a young Earth creationist,
Right,
and he has literally been on the floor of the Senate talking about evolution is just a theory and maybe it shouldn't be taught in schools, and that old rhetoric and everything. And
right,
how it just seems like there's just such a problem that understanding that evolution isn't really a class. You know what I
right.
mean?
Yeah,
You, obviously, when you go up to higher levels of education, it could have all kind of different names. But when you're basically going K to 12, you're learning different fields of science, and a lot of them are related to evolution.
right,
And you're learning it whether you like it or not, just by learning, biology and things like that. And then there seems to be they're setting up something that just doesn't exist. Like there's another book or another class that's just about this evolution thing. You know what I mean?
right,
And it's only set up in some way to, as far as the religious right goes, that it just seems to be targeting their religion.
yeah,
And there's just, again, it's that this us against them thing that everybody seems to be setting up.
right.
That
Whereas, like, as you were kind of putting it, it's kind of already interwoven in there, which I guess some people, or like you said, the opposite side, quote unquote, could say, they've brainwashed the children. I was, I guess, thinking recently, if you're, let me give you an example. If Einstein, when he came along and he dismantled quote unquote Newtonian physics, which he didn't really do for all the physics nerds out there, but he he understood like the foundational physics at the time. It's not like he came along and figured everything out by himself and then said nope, all this other physics that we thought we knew previously is now wrong. Like no, that's not what happened. Like he learned basic geometry, he learned basic physics, including Newtonian physics, and the same thing is true with the biological sciences. Like you're not going to go into a field and debunk the entire field, or I shouldn't use the word debunk, you not overthrow all of what we know about evolution and modern biological science by not going into school and learning everything we know, or what we thought we knew, I guess, in this hypothetical example about biological science. Like if you don't take the time to learn and get yourself educated about this stuff. um, Another good example is people who vouch against the dark matter hypothesis, which
right,
is in standard cosmology, but the people who, or most of the astrophysicists who try and come up with ideas besides dark matter. They understand dark matter and its successes. They're just trying out different ideas and seeing if there are any other models that work. But they understand the limits of their ideas and the successes of the opposing ideas of dark matter and vice versa. And like there are just tons of examples of people in their respective fields who know what they're talking about and are still uh, pushing the science forward, but it's not like they're pushing it forward by being ignorant. about what was already the standard. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Sorry, I didn't mean
And
to go off on
no,
a
no, no,
tangent like that, but
no,
yeah,
that's fine. Yeah, I was going to say the thing with that the opponents, I guess you could call them, would say that, well, dark matter is just something they made up to
right,
explain something where it and that's why they can't tell you what it is. But it's actually we know there's something there, but we
right,
don't know exactly what it is.
right,
It's they switched it completely around.
right. Yeah, it's not like this epicycle that the kind that Ptolemy put forward to rescue the geocentric model of the solar system. It's not like that. Like no one, um, I guess a good way of putting it is when the dark matter idea by Fritz Zwicky, an astronomer, was first put forward, for example, in the 1930s ish. Um, People didn't really take it very seriously. Like there's all this dark matter out there. Like oh, maybe it's just cold gas or planets that we can't see. It wasn't until like decades later that started the evidence started piling up that no, there's something out there and it's not what's called baryonic matter or matter made of protons and neutrons and the like. Um, so yeah, it's not like it's this fudge factor that was put on to rescue a dying fury, as some people would say. It's they didn't want that idea to be true, but the
Right.
evidence that's where it pointed.
Well, yeah, that's the same thing when you hear about evolution that
Right,
the whole world just stumbled over themselves to embrace evolution overnight, and
right,
it's
right. Yeah,
they
yeah. Of
didn't.
course
I
not.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, this is also part of the historical aspect, which is even before Darwin came along, there were some inclinations of what we might now call evolution. Like they weren't as sophisticated or well thought out in some respects, but they're like evolution definitely predated Darwin as a concept. Like you got not just Lamarck, you also have uh, heck, Darwin's grandfather, Erasmus Darwin, had some ideas about that. So, yeah, it's not something we just stumbled along and everyone followed it without checking into it. Um, like even after Darwin, there were people who said, "Oh, okay, evolution seems like a reasonable idea, but natural selection, no, that's probably not the case." And now here we are, most creationists or younger creationists saying natural selection or what they would call variation within a kind is definitely real. Well, most of them at least. There are probably some exceptions. I can get ICR, but you get my point though with both the past before Darwin um, and after Darwin. Like evolution isn't it's not that kind of idea. Basically, hold on, give me a sec. All right, sorry about that.
not a problem. Yeah, and that's the thing that uh, the science is built on a lot of knowledge
Right.
of many observations and everything, and going back to yeah all the different things people observed about nature, biology, whatever, watching their animals reproduce and making babies and saying, wow, I'm figuring
Oh
out
yeah.
kind of how this works. Right.
Right. But yeah, I mean, like with in the origin of species, for example, Darwin spends a lot of time talking about pigeons and how he breeds them, and all the farmers how they breed all these crops to kind of put a uh to kind of tie it his radical idea of natural selection to what everyone was pretty much familiar with at that time, which was breeding and what we now call artificial selection of plants and animals. And
Right, and a lot of people learned lessons about that, like Ray Comfort with his banana.
right, yeah,
Yeah, just because we have it now, it
right,
wasn't
yeah.
that long
Well, it
ago
wasn't
that
always there. Yeah.
we didn't have it. Yeah, and the diet was a lot less varied.
Yeah. Well, actually, it reminds me. I'm not going to say his name, but there's a creationist out there who thinks that dogs must be a separate kind from wolves. So that's kind of a
I think I
little
know. I
out
think
there.
I know
Yeah, yeah, you
exactly
know
who
who
you're
I'm
talking
talking
about.
about.
Yes, I
But
do. I heard that discussion.
oh, one sec. Sorry, can't control people calling me randomly.
The wonders of technology.
Yeah. Anyway, what were you saying?
I was saying that I heard that discussion that you're talking about.
Oh yeah, yeah,
I think when he was on a debate and he was bringing that up, and yeah,
yeah.
even his peers were kind of rolling their eyes, saying, "Where did you get that one from? That's a new one."
Right. Well, I guess with that kind of segue with natural selection is I think like AIG in particular is kind of it's okay with natural selection, right? Like it's one of those organizations that um they obviously don't think it leads to macro evolution, quote unquote, but they think it's real at least.
Was there? That's always my thing. Is that it seems that Ken Ham tries to ride the line of not sounding too ridiculous by accepting uh, the mechanisms of evolution,
Right.
but then he'll say, "But that's not evolution."
Right, right, yeah. Or they'll often say, well, creationists have accepted this all along, or even worse, we predicted this all along. Like this isn't a surprise to us.
Hmm.
Even though when you go back, like I was saying, to uh, the the beginnings of creationism, when like speciation uh, wasn't thought of as a real thing. And now we have dozens of examples of new species emerging, and now they just say, "Oh, well, that's just variation within a kind. There's a limit there," even though they can't really tell you where it is. Like they'll point their fingers at a vague boundary and say, "Well, obviously a cat can't give birth to a whale or something like that." But
Something really
um,
absurd. Yeah.
yeah, which is why I often phrase the question as give me a mechanistic limit, hopefully genetically, to that boundary, because fundamentally you're dealing with heredity and what Mendel discovered about the same time as Darwin, that genes or what he called factors, but what we now call genes, are passed on from one generation to the next. And unless you can stop that and stop variation in general, then you're going to get evolution. It's as simple as that. Like, sure, the mechanisms might differ between different uh, traits in a way, but all you really need for evolution is heritable variation. And so far, no one has been, or no creationists, I mean, have been able to explain where the limit is in that. You know what I mean?
I've noticed that question comes up a lot and they can't answer it
Right. Or
other than to
they'll
go
kind of
to
give a non-answer, basically,
right.
kind of
The
a
Kent
red herring.
Hovind answer would be, well, you can't make an elephant the size of Texas or something like that, which is more of
Right,
it's a physics question. It's not a
right,
biology
exactly,
question.
right. Yeah, that's like I said, where you have to put the genetic aspect to it, not just, oh, okay, what's keeping it from growing this size? Well, that's a like you said, a physics physical constraints. we're talking about like genetic constraints, developmental constraints, that's a totally different issue. Now, granted, there are studies being done and okay, what is and isn't possible, or what's increasingly less likely to happen the further down you go down a branch. Like a good example would be vertebrates, or more specifically tetrapods. You never find a tetrapod with its third or middle finger shorter than the others. Like you never see that. Like one of the outside fingers is longer than the other. So there's obviously some developmental constraint going on there. And
Right.
certainly with at least some other features. Like others are more mutable. They can change readily. But yeah, certain features um they can change eventually. Like we see that across the broad sweeps of the tree of life. Um, yeah, yeah, there's a whole lot of complexity going on there, and it's not as simple as saying, well, what will evolve, what can't evolve, and um, can you get a a dog the size of Texas, or like you said, how Kent Hovind phrases it, like it's not as simple or naive as that, basically.
And and then the question always goes back to where do they get this stuff from? You know what I mean? It's
Right.
it's
Yeah.
like I'm not a scientist, but even as far back as I can remember as a little kid, I was always, fascinated by all the things that science can
Yeah.
explain and does know and what they're exploring and what they might find out tomorrow. And it was
Yeah.
I was a little science geek as a kid. And I never thought, wow, what a bunch of dummies. You know what I mean?
Right, yeah. And I mean, they
And
obviously don't get it from the Bible, for example. Like, there's no place in the Bible where it says genetic entropy happened here, or something like that. Like,
sure.
so yeah, where are they getting it from?
Yeah. And it's not just with the Christians, you've got a lot of the Muslim apologists are adopting a lot
Right,
of the
yeah.
same arguments
Oh yeah, yeah,
because I was on with little bit of interaction in that world too, and it's the
uh,
same arguments. It's the same
yeah.
thing.
Well, I think it part of that maybe it certainly not all of it, but part of it is probably because the argument stems from a much older, deeper foundation. Like you've obviously heard of William Paley and his watchmaker argument and all that,
Sure.
um, and how that's now being obviously in different forms now, but it's all over the place with the intelligent design movement. Like the basic argument pretty much is the same. It's just in different forms. So yeah, certainly with at least some of these creationist arguments, they haven't really changed in their basic roots, uh, essentially. Some of them, like with genetics or soft tissue in dinosaurs, those are relatively more recent, but a lot of them aren't.
And touching on the soft tissue, we might as well just mention it really quick that
Yeah.
one of the people who discovered that is Mary Schweitzer. And Mary Schweitzer has herself has put out that the creationists are misrepresenting her findings.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And she herself is a Christian.
Right. Yes, she is. And that's the point too, that while you mentioned it, we can bring up another straw man or us against them that they set up is the
Sure.
secular scientists and the believing scientists.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you'd like to address how do they do experiments differently?
Right. Yeah. I I mean, do they have in their minds that like you're a Christian scientist, and when you go into the laboratory and start working with biochemicals, you suddenly have to adhere to the Bible. Well, obviously that's not the case, but like they they should be applying that logic if what they're saying they're taking seriously. Because like they're Buddhists, Christians, Jews, all sorts of religious folks who accept evolution as true, um, accept Big Bang cosmology, all this secular propaganda, as they would put it. Uh, yeah, you don't have to be an atheist or an agnostic to do science. Now, I myself am not religious as far as I'm aware, but um, yeah, there are people who are able to reconcile these two seemingly opposite ends. Now, my guess would be that they do have to be lenient in some regards in terms of what uh, scriptural texts say, but that's neither here nor there. It's more to do with how they deal with it.
And it's not to demean any of these people because folks like
Yeah,
Hugh Ross and Cy Gart and a lot of them, they are devout believers, but yet they also try to explain that no, this is good science. We have good science, we have good evidence, we have good explanations, and that maybe when the Bible says this, this is what it means. And I think that's Hugh Ross likes to use the book of nature.
right. Yeah,
So
that's a
when
good
the
way of
Bible
putting it.
does, yeah, when the Bible doesn't say, it's because the Bible didn't say,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So
The yeah, the Bible
no,
that well,
go
I
ahead.
mean, like you could go deeper and say like the Bible doesn't say 2 + 2 = 4. Does that mean 2 + 2 doesn't equal 4?
Correct, right? And then that's the go-to answer by believers is that all the answers are in this book,
Right.
and it doesn't matter which text that they're following. They're all the answers are in their book. But then as soon as you ask them, yeah, obviously, where does it say 2 + 2 is in there? Well,
Right.
obviously, that is like Hugh Ross would use. That's the book of nature. And
Right.
then you are admitting then your book doesn't have all the answers. It was never intended to have all the answers, and that's just misrepresenting your book when you say it has all the answers in it.
Right. And obviously no one's to use a more relevant example perhaps. The Bible or the Quran or whatever doesn't say in this uh organism you will find this little molecule and it has these little rungs around it and it's going to be found in all other living things and you should go sequence it and yeah obviously they're not scientific textbooks and you shouldn't treat them as those kinds of texts like you should treat them at best as metaphorical or allegorical or as revealing the book of nature like you said.
And well, like I say, you're studying. Um, is everybody that's studying science a non-believer?
Oh no, certainly not.
I mean, obviously, especially in the world we live in, just by the numbers, most of the people who are in the science class are believers in one religion or another.
Right. I mean, even professionals. Oh, a good example would be Ken Miller, and he's vocally against young Earth creationism, but he's a devout Catholic, I believe, and he goes to church and like the faith and science are not uh, completely separate from one another in the eyes of him and other people who are able to reconcile these things.
And that's a majority.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It
They're
kind
not
of
the
goes to the
minority.
oh
Yeah,
yeah, yeah. It goes to the common claim, well, evolution's a religion. Well, then I like to say, well, apparently then a lot of people have two religions or
right.
more.
Yeah, that's a classic Ken Ham with it. It's just a religion.
Right,
Anything he doesn't like is, well, that's just a religion, and that way he can
right.
set it up.
Or
And
it's
then,
it's historical science is what he
oh,
likes to
oh,
call it.
oh, yeah, observational and historical.
Right,
And of course, everybody that knows Ken Ham knows his famous catch line is, "Were you there?"
right, yeah,
Of course, if you say, "Well, were you there when Jesus was preaching?"
right. He has an answer to that.
So yeah, his arguments are, not the strongest, but they seem to appeal to so many people.
Right, yeah. I think that's a good generalization of it in because I mean, like with YouTube creationists, like we see with standing for truth and logical, plausible, probable, um, like they're using, I guess, compared to some other folks like Kent Hovind, some pretty sophisticated, let's just call it that, arguments, or relatively more sophisticated
Yep.
and complex. But with, like you said, people like Ken Ham who are, or even Ken Hovind who are more public about these issues and are kind of in the real world of how I want to phrase like you get what I'm saying. Like
It's a
their
it's a
arguments
cult,
are more
like a
appealing.
cult follow what do you call it? Cult of personality, or
Yeah,
or
yeah, yeah. It's like a cult, and like you said, their arguments are simpler, but they're more appealing to the general public or the people who follow them, I should say, because obviously not everyone goes to the Creation Museum in Kentucky, thank goodness. But
and then yeah, we might as well touch on my famous favorite creationist, I guess I could call him, is Ken Ham, who I sadly have learned that he is the number one supplier of these creationist materials, and that includes his many homeschooling materials.
yeah,
And
yeah.
Dan Phelps just had a post up, and anybody that doesn't know Dan, he keeps tabs on Ken Ham with the attendance numbers and
Oh
everything.
yeah, Dan Phelps, yeah.
Yep, and he's uh, well, everybody knows Dan knows Dan. So
Right, yeah.
if you haven't, you need to go check out Dan Phelps. He's the man. He stays on Ken Ham. And he said that, yeah, they're purchasing another building to be used as some kind of an educational facility or something.
Oh dear.
So yeah, so he has an incredible amount of money and or great credit.
Right. Or what do we have now? We have the Creation Museum, the Ark Encounter, and do we have any others or any big
Well
ones
then,
right now?
and then if he buys this new building, yeah,
Oh, okay. But I mean, still, like you said, that's a lot of money coming in from
hmm
lay people out there,
and
and even family members could get like a split on this.
and the thing is, I mean, for I, it's hard not to laugh, and I don't want to laugh at anybody. You know
Right,
what I mean? Because I know a lot of people, are misinformed for a lot of different reasons,
right. They
and
don't know any better.
it's nothing right. It's nothing
Right,
personal against anybody. Okay,
right. Yeah,
but I mean, to be honest, I mean, we laugh about these, man living with dinosaurs, and Ken Ham trying to explain how he put them all on a boat.
right.
I mean, what?
Well, I
It,
mean,
it
it's I think Dr. Dan from Creation Myths, which if anyone who listens isn't familiar with Dr. Dan, you should go subscribe.
Yep.
Um, he relatively recently went over this sort of topic that, well, it's you today it's going to be creationism, tomorrow it's vaccine denial and climate change denial, and I guess flat earth, just to put the cherry on top. um,
Hmm.
and it spills into other issues because, as he likes to say, well, you may not think uh, very much about man living with dinosaurs, as you put it, but you're using the same type of logic, quote unquote, or lack thereof, to to come up with these conclusions. And once you start applying that to this area of topics, now you're applying it to completely different areas that do happen to uh, affect the lives and health of people around you, and that's a no no, obviously.
My notes on it says bad info is bad. Yeah,
Right.
that's that is one of my notes that, and right above it, yeah, that says harms everyone. And
Yeah.
right down my list is exactly what you said, is the with climate change and the and not just with the vaccines and everything,
Right.
but across the board, how many times have you heard about, with homeopathy
Oh yeah.
and
Yeah.
all kind of alternatives and everything, which I have nothing against, because yes, some things that are natural are good for you and can cure what ails you.
Right.
If you have an upset stomach, you can make a little herbal tea. It calms your stomach right down. There's no need to take medicine. But when your stomach problems don't go away, that's when you should go and see somebody about it,
Right. Yeah.
and
I
not
mean,
just think,
there's a
yeah,
certain point where it's no longer alternative medicine.
right.
um
Oh, and
yeah.
that's not, and again, I don't want to make light of that, because
Yeah.
obviously there's a lot of things that just, they're proven that they don't work. They're just at
Right.
best a
Or
placebo.
I mean, like even within science, like there are certain areas where something works here, but it doesn't quite work here, and you need to make some modifications. So
Mhm.
I guess
But
you could generalize it to that extent.
yeah, but back to, a little ginger tea or something to calm your stomach, or
Yeah.
something similar to help you relax and help you sleep. Sure, it works, and it's fine,
Right.
But again, that doesn't justify everything else working. You know,
Right.
it
That's not going
doesn't
to fix your
justify.
broken kidneys, for
Right.
example.
That's exactly. I was going to say it doesn't cure cancer. Yeah, it doesn't. These are the things where you can't put too much faith in something just because somebody says, yeah, what was the craze for a while? Uh, Taking way too much vitamin C,
Oh, okay.
claiming, yeah, if you're running all these hundreds of milligrams of vitamin C in you, it's going to do all these miraculous things. Of course, the reality is your body doesn't store it like that, and you're just going to excrete it right back out.
Right.
And what's the other one that's famous? The detoxifying yourself and changing your pH.
Oh, yeah.
Could
That's
could you could you say could you say something about the people who drink alkaline water and all these things and are changing their pH? How do you change your pH?
uh um that's a good question, because like I mean our how would you change your pH? Like the
My
cells in your
understand Yeah,
yeah.
my understanding is your body regulates your pH.
Right, exactly. There's a set, not a set throughout the body, obviously. Like different cells have different pH levels
Right, right.
that they need. But like, yeah, you regulate, your body regulates the pH, the temperature, all these different homeostasis, right? Like,
Mhm.
how would you permanently change your pH? I guess is the question to ask. Like, I don't think that's possible.
Right. I don't think it is either.
Because if you take it to one extreme, then it's just going to flip right back the other way, and you're probably going to have a sick stomach or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. If you throw your pH off, then it's got to have a detrimental effect because there's a reason that it's in a certain parameter.
Right. Which, to kind of bring things back to evolution, it is true that within a natural population, uh, things that are already well adapted tend to uh, they tend to change not less often, but the changes that do happen tend to be detrimental, obviously, because I hate to use this analogy, but um, if you have a machine or a computer, um, and you put wires here and there, most of the time you're gonna break the computer or the machine, right? Like it's very few cases where you're gonna put things in and it's suddenly going to be a totally better computer. Now, obviously, the genetic code in this context is more malleable than the wiring of a computer, and we see that in mutations and all the different kinds of mutations. But the general point is that things that are well adapted to a particular environment, unless that environment changes, which it usually does, but very slowly, things that are well adapted tend to stay that way. If a random change occurs, like it's typically going to be bad. It's going to bring it down from what's called the optimal fitness peak, the local maximum the population is at. And I lost my train of thought, but yeah, that's what you were saying reminds me of.
Well, I was gonna say that what it brings to mind is another thing that creationists like to use is stasis, and that
Oh yeah,
stasis
yeah,
is not evolution. And they'll use examples like the horseshoe crab and other these species,
right. The
leaving out
coelacanth.
that leaving out they have speciated. Yeah, and the coelacanth, that's another great one. The
Yeah.
one they bring up from the fossil record is not the one they're bringing up from the deep ocean.
Right, yeah, right, exactly. Well, there isn't even a one from the fossil record because there's a whole genera of coelacanths that used to exist,
Right, right.
which, like you said, they speciated. Like another good example would be sharks and rays. Like today, they may seem pretty standard, uh, but back in the day, you had sharks with their dorsal fin looked like a an anvil. The Stephacanth sharks, others, which like Helicoprion, which I'm not quite certain if it's still considered a true shark. It may be closely related to them, but uh, like you had this weird menagerie of different shark species and like crocodilians again. Like you used to have crocodilian species with that lived on the land like full time. They weren't aquatic. Like you don't see any of those around today. Like you can see an alligator hop onto land and just sit there, but that's not really the same thing as actively looking for tiny primitive mammals in the rocks all day long. Like these groups have changed over time, just really more slowly, or in some cases, they're just really well adapted to their particular environment or their set of environments.
And on the reptiles, I wanted to ask you a question. One of the things
Sure.
that's brought up, and it's a Kent Hovind special, is that dinosaurs were just giant lizards.
Um,
And if you just feed a chameleon enough
right.
and let it live long enough, it's going to be, you know,
A triceratops or
yeah,
something.
how many stories high,
Yeah.
and what do you have to say about that? How big? Let's just say hypothetically, a chameleon lived for hundreds and hundreds of years. Would it get that big?
Probably not. Well, there's multiple ways to that I could tackle that. I'll just give a few. Well, for one, chameleons specifically are tree dwellers, so they're obviously not going to grow to be the size of a house. Um, I guess there are a few species that live on land, but I don't. Uh,
You could
I
use
guess
a
you do
you
have
could use a
crocodile.
newt. You could use a newt or something if it
Yeah,
something crawling on the ground.
yeah. Well, like I mean, there are certain reptiles like crocodiles that they live 100 years, they keep growing, but like there's a certain point where you don't grow anymore. And a more fundamental issue is the fact that dinosaurs are not lizards. We know they're not lizards for several reasons. They have many bird-like features, and
Oh,
in fact,
they don't want to hear that.
right, right. Well, another thing is their ankle bones, for example, like in the Kruger tarsi, or whatever the major grouping of crocodilians and their relatives is right now. Their ankle structure is very different from dinosaurs and birds today, um, and it's also very, or lizards are kind of similar to that kind of ankle structure. So a lizard's ankle is very different from a dinosaur's ankle. A lizard's breathing apparatus is very different from a bird, or in this case, a dinosaur's breathing apparatus, because we know some dinosaurs at least had little air sacs in between their bones that allowed them to breathe and move around and uh, do all that stuff more easily, just like birds. Um, their other types of their skeletal morphology is different. Like I I don't know all of them obviously, but like yeah, dinosaurs are definitely not lizards. Like they're about as far removed as from lizards as is possible on the reptile family tree.
Those
So,
are those are great points.
which I mean, if you want to quibble about that and say, well, they look like lizards somewhat, well, it, in cladistically speaking, they're definitely not lizards, and also, well, like you said, cladistically speaking, birds are dinosaurs, and that's a no-no for creationism. Um, Despite the fact that we found all sorts of feathered species of dinosaurs with all sorts of variations of feathers, from asymmetrical ones for flight to symmetrical ones for display to just little proto feather fuzz for keeping warm. So,
Well, the creationists have to keep to birds because the birds are in the Bible with the flying things and everything, even though it
right.
brings about the problem with bats that they don't
Right.
like to
Yeah, I was
talk
just gonna
about.
say bats and oh, would like dragonflies count as birds then? Oh, that's a weird thought to think about.
Speaking of, I get dragonfly nymphs in my pond. It's really neat. Yep.
Oh, cool.
Yep.
Oh yeah, they're pretty good at catching those tadpoles with their proboscis and all that.
I I hear they are brutal, and it's a good thing they aren't bigger than they are.
Oh yeah.
I
Well,
wouldn't want to go up. Go ahead.
or that you mentioned the dragonfly nymphs, and that actually brings up a good example of morphological evolution. Um, have you heard of the lake versus ocean stickleback fish?
Yep.
Yep. Okay. So for anyone who doesn't know, basically there are these ocean stickleback fish, which is a kind of fish that lives in the sea and has these pelvic spines, these spines where their pelvic fins are located, um, and obviously that helps them escape or deter predators from eating them, because you can't really swallow something that moves that slowly but has these giant spines sticking out of it. But once they moved into the lakes and the delta environments of North America and actually other places, but that's a different topic. They lost these pelvic spines due to relatively simple mutations, and a single upstream region of a gene that in fact occurs in multiple different parts of their body, but this particular mutation happened multiple times in the region that controls whether this gene will be expressed or not. So, in this particular example, it uh, was the region that controlled whether it would be expressed in the pelvic spines and would help, therefore, make the pelvic spine. So, this region was turned off um, or mutated so that the gene was turned off in the pelvic spine, so they no longer have pelvic spines. Um, and that helped them have a little less uh, coming off of them for dragonfly nymphs with their proboscis to latch onto. And that may be one selective pressure, among other things, that made this loss of pelvic spines in the lake stickleback fish beneficial. Um, Now, obviously, creationists are going to retort that, well, that's a loss of genetic information. Well, really, you could say nothing was really lost there. Um, the gene is still there; it's still functioning in other parts of the body, but the it was just turned off in a particular area, and that's actually a good example of modular features of the body. Like you don't have to change everything all at once to get a new novel thing occurring. You know what I mean? Like you can just tweak something here and it doesn't affect the rest of the body significantly.
Right, and that's what I wanted to go to when they talk about flight, and that flight wasn't a pursuit that they had.
Right.
Flight was just something that came out of them growing their, arms bigger for, just to protect your eggs, for
Yeah.
example.
And then
And
the
then,
feathers probably came along and helped them cover up their eggs. Yeah.
mhm, and then
And probably
just you just got the luck of they flap it and they were able to get up or down depending there, there's different ideas. I'm sure
yeah,
whether
yeah,
flight was from the
yeah.
bottom up or the
It
top
helped them
down,
maneuver more easily, let's
or
just say
both,
that.
or
Yeah,
both.
yeah,
And that, yeah, then you just lead to natural selection. They didn't get eaten.
right. And to kind of connect that to what I was saying, like you didn't need to change. Well, actually, feathers are made of keratin, and those aren't really significantly different from what's found in a skin. In fact, you can think of, I know Dr. Dan also, creationist also went over this one time. Um, Really, feathers are kind of a modified skin tissue, or modified scales in some sense. And
Right.
all that's really changed is the expression pattern of where the genes that uh, code for keratin are expressed and how they're expressed and when they're expressed. And really, it just requires a simple tweak in that expression pattern to change this overlapping scale morphology to simple feathers. And from there, obviously, you can get add on more complexity with how it branches and whatnot. But yeah, the fundamentally these are simple genetic changes.
Well, yeah, I've seen the creationist presentations where they'll show, look at the scale under the microscope, and now look at this feather.
Right. Yeah.
Of course, they're leaving out, the proto feather, development all in between, or even showing something more simple like downy feathers on chicks or something.
Right. Or even taking a different direction, like I was saying, they would be forgetting that they're made of basically the same material. Like,
Yep.
I mean, if, it looks pretty different, but the proteins inside are fundamentally pretty similar to each other. So, I mean,
Yeah,
I
you
don't know. Maybe they
stretch
just can't show that under a microscope, or maybe they're choosing not to show that.
yeah, you just stretch a scale out into some filaments and you've got a proto feather. I mean,
Yeah, exactly.
it doesn't seem that, far of a reach. Of course, again, when you're going to set it up as look at this and look at this and leave all the in betweens out, yeah, then it, obviously looks like, whoa.
Right. Well, that's the actually to use another example, eyes. It's a good thing that nature has so much variety and so much diversity in it, because you can't really connect them phylogenetically in terms of their history, but all these different organisms with different types of eyes, you can say, well, here are different organisms that have different types of eyes. They aren't the same, but um, you can kind of connect the dots and find out how these different types of eyes could have evolved from one another based on the types of eyes we see today, and combining that with the genetic changes involved. Um, like, I guess the comeback would be, well, that's just a story, but I mean, obviously they have different sets of eyes or different sets of feathers or whatnot, and they're still doing fine. So it's not like a single change here is going to mess the whole thing up just by
Hmm.
tweaking it a little bit.
Well, I think Mike addressed that speed. He uh, maybe when he talked with Rebecca, where he addressed that. Well, of course, it's a story
Oh yeah, yeah,
because to especially to relay things to a layperson, you have to put it in everyday terms, and it's a story.
right,
But again, and then Ken Hovind and the rest will use that of saying, "See, it's just a story. It's just lines on paper.
right,
You know all the arguments." Again,
yeah,
leaving out, well, no, that's where you have to go to the libraries packed with all the papers and the
right,
research
yeah,
and the data. That fills in those lines and and all that.
yeah. That lines on paper thing used to really get me when I was into phylogenetics. Uh, I could spend a whole other hour going into misconceptions about phylogenetics and creation of creationists, and how they misconstrue it, and how they, the common design type of stuff. That one really gets me.
We can always schedule some other topics for another time. It's you know
Yeah, yeah,
I like talking about this stuff, even if Gurr doesn't. Shout out,
yeah.
shout out to Gurr. I love
Shout out
Gurr.
to girl.
I love the YouTube community, and I try to be cool with everybody, and I hope everybody likes me back the same, and I try to be
Yeah,
fair with everybody, and
I mean, we're all in this together, right?
yep, yep. And speaking of the flight, really quick, that's
Sure.
another thing with the creationist points and stuff, and then leaving out all the different ways of flight. From the dragonfly to the bumblebee to the
Right.
hummingbird to the albatross, the eagle, the condor. Um,
Yeah,
you know,
even within insects or within birds, like not all of them fly the same. Like you
and
have
then yeah, I was going to add it
gliders, and
right. Then the flightless
yeah,
birds, the seabirds and the penguins and everything that use the water and everything to
yeah.
basically fly through with the same
Well,
similar
like
structure.
even within that, like a hummingbird obviously doesn't fly or use the same type of flying structure as a an albatross. So you got a variation within that as well.
And if there is this supposed a great design for flight,
Right.
it doesn't show up. If there's a great, I always like to point out, well, if skeletons are so great, why do we have exoskeletons?
Right. Yeah.
Because the
Like what?
argument is always, well, this is such a great design. This
Right.
is why dogs and people and everybody all have bones. But
Right. Like we
insects
needed
do
this
really
structure.
great with it. Yeah,
Yeah.
insects do great with exoskeletons.
Yeah. I mean, there are animals without skeletons altogether. So,
Uh, yeah, there you go. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
if the designer designed all this stuff, like, I mean, they always come back to, well, he could have done it that way. It was his creative intent. He was just
but it
showing off
always
that day.
right, but it always seems to line up with the same lineage of species, though.
Right, yeah, it just happens to show, like, things evolved.
Yeah, there aren't any dragonflies that have skeletons just because he wanted a certain dragonfly to be a little more structurally sound and maybe you couldn't squish it as easy or something, you know?
Right, yeah. I mean, you can look at the genetic level too and say, well, why do you put all these different genetic elements there that don't seem to really affect things very much? And obviously, they're gonna push back on that a lot and say, well, there's no junk DNA or no non-functional DNA. Well, the case for that is pretty solid. So, obviously, that would uh, uh, stir a few things in the creationist community if you were to say that in front of them. But I know, like standing for truth, for example, he's really adamant about that.
Yep, I know Donnie well. I'm not going to talk about Donnie tonight, but
Yeah, yeah.
maybe
Sorry,
another
I
another
shouldn't be
evening.
mentioning these other people, but I'm thinking of
No, we're
examples off
not,
the top of
we're
my
not.
head.
That's all good. I mean, any of them want to come on and talk with me,
Yeah,
they can come on and I'll be fair and civil and I don't care if it's Donnie or anybody, as long as they're, civil with me, you know, if you just want to call me names or something, you can do it in a comment somewhere, you know what I mean?
yeah, yeah,
But hey, I'll talk with anybody. So, the invitation's always out there to anybody. You want to talk, I'll talk with anybody and I'll give you a
yeah.
fair shot, present your case and everything, not a problem. But
Like,
I'm
if you
also
want to
gonna
have a
fire
civil
back the tough.
discussion, I'll have a civil discussion. But if you're gonna just yell at me, then I got better things to do.
Sure, but you gotta be prepared to, answer the tough questions because
Right? Yeah, yeah.
just because you're used to a softball arena doesn't mean, that I have to play softball either.
Right. Yeah. That's true.
Um, so anyway, yeah, I was talking that we do this for about an hour, and it's been about an hour,
Sure. I mean,
and,
we don't have to end it abruptly, but
yeah, no, I
can't even
wanted to
think of anything else I really want to talk about. So
yeah, I wanted to ask you, is there anything lately that's, I know you brought up the James Webb and how they were misusing that.
yeah. Well, I guess recently I've been into. I probably said this one time on Mike's channel the other day, but microbiology and all that, and all the diversity of stuff you can see under the microscope. That's kind of interesting to me lately.
And well, let's touch on you just real quick for a minute.
Sure.
Um, what's your history? Have you always been into science? Is it something you
Yeah.
fell into? How what's a quick little rundown on your science background?
Yeah. I guess it's probably not that terribly interesting because, yeah, I mean, as soon as I started picking up books and reading them, I was hooked. Like I was reading nonfiction stuff on science and maybe a little bit of history. I mean, fiction stuff I was okay with, but that wasn't really the type of stuff I wanted to read. So, yeah, early on, I was just focused on science, and it's just continued to progress since then.
And a shout out to the young people out there that it I always love science and I grew up just fine and I don't have any pentagrams set up or anything, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
It's okay, to learn things,
yeah,
and it's okay to have your faith too.
yeah. I
But
think the thing I like to always say is you don't have to be intelligent or however you want to say that. Like you don't have to be a genius. You just have to be curious about it and want to learn more about it. And with that, you can do some pretty good things in the world.
I liked what the Pope had said recently that the uh, the faith has some issues with how vaccines are made, but get your shots.
Right, right, yeah,
because it's better to live another day, and then we can discuss the moral issues, how they're made, if they're using, anything they object to, like stem cells or anything. And I'm not saying they are, not in
right,
any
yeah,
way, just as an example. Whatever they may be using that they have any moral objections to, live to fight another day, in other words.
yeah,
And I thought that was really great when he came out and said that.
yeah. That's a good way of looking at things.
And yeah, so I wanted to, with all these problems, how do we get through? I mean, is it can we get through to these people? Is it a generational thing, or we
That's
just have to
the
wait for
million
them
dollar
to
question, isn't
move
it?
on?
Yeah. Ah,
You know, I
I've thought about that for a long time now, and I guess even now I'm not fully decided on it. But I mean, people on the fence, you could probably change their mind, persuade them. But I mean, some of these people, they're probably just too set in their thinking that it's not really a good use. It's probably better to spread it, the correct information out there and kind of make it more public and kind of push back against the publicity that misinformation is getting. Um, yeah, that's just my opinion.
well, and that's I don't like that, like you say, free speech and everything and stuff, but it's always tough when people have these big platforms
Yeah,
and they're misusing them.
right. Yeah,
And you can't do much about things like the internet and everything. And I'm not trying to say we should, but yeah, putting these people on
yeah,
primetime TV, what you want to call it or something, I think is a level where that shouldn't be promoted.
yeah,
And that, yeah, we do need the people out there like you've mentioned Dan, and
yeah,
we know the list out there. A lot of great guys out there and gals that are doing great content and pushing back on this stuff. And you have to do it,
right.
even though, like Mike and I can relate. We often talk about us old timers. It's just it just gets so old.
Yeah,
You hear it over and over and over, and as
you
soon
have
as you think you're making some some kind of progress with debunking
180 degrees
arguments,
back
you've got
again.
another whole generation
Yeah,
comes in, and now all the young guys and gals out there are coming out, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, well, have you ever heard of Ken Hovind?" And I was like, "Sure. What would you like to know about him?"
right, right. Yeah,
But yeah, I struggle with it too. It's my I've got two sons, and one of them was a little bit more into science than the other one, but he's also a lot more handy. He takes more after me. I've heard he's a chip off the old block.
cool.
But my other boy though, he's not he's not like on the other side where, well, I'm not into science, and I was never really into. I didn't really ever learn it.
Right.
I passed the class because I had to, but now I'm going to tell you what's wrong with it. I mean, I just couldn't ever see that, coming from him. But there
Right.
are people, and I'm sure you've ran into it too, where sometimes they're relatives or friends or something,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
and they start talking about their visit to Ken Ham's Ark Park and all,
Yeah.
all the things they learned when they were there, and it's just it's so tough because especially with people, otherwise, for an example, I'm just throwing things out there, but other in their normal lives, they're a doctor or a lawyer or a mechanic or a barber or whatever they do, and you can go out and have beers with them and talk about football games and
Yeah.
all the normal things, and then all of a sudden, have you heard of Ken Ham and his Ark Park?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
again, I don't want to insult anybody's religion or anything like that.
Yeah,
My personal views on religions aside, I'm not one to tell anybody what to think. Okay,
right.
but gee whiz, you know what I mean? Just stop
Yeah,
for a minute and ask yourselves. You know what I mean?
yeah.
Is do you really think farmers hook dinosaurs up to plows?
Right, right. Oh,
You know,
yeah,
seriously, ask yourself. Is this just too beyond? Us against them. Is it just too much of well, maybe the scientists don't have it all quite right, and I'm skeptical, and that's fine. But if you want to set yourself up as an expert, and that's where the creationists fail because
right.
they're scientists, and you've mentioned I don't know if it I yeah, I think Dan is the one that's had the conversations with Nathaniel Jeanson, isn't he?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And that's Ken Ham's prize scientist over there. And I've had a few
Right.
discussions with Nathaniel myself, and
Oh,
he
okay.
he wasn't very nice with me.
Oh,
But
I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah, I've got the screenshots on that conversation. But he basically just he just throws at you that if as soon as he doesn't uh, think that you're in any way agreeing with him, he's going to get real defensive,
Right,
and he just throws at you that you didn't read my stuff and this and that and everything else. And then when he went on, I don't know what he was on. He was on a bunch of different ones anyway, and it was the same thing when you just attack back. And one of the people that he was talking with was a biologist who read his book and was
right,
trying to engage with him. But as soon as he disagreed with anything, instead of trying to explain himself, he just goes on the attack.
right. Are
Well,
you
you're
talking
just
about the Herman Mays discussion that you had?
that might have been the one, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I watched part of that one. That was
Hmm.
interesting, to say the least.
And they go right back into the it's us against them.
Yep.
Yeah, you're just a secular scientist. You're just an atheist. You got it out for me.
Yeah.
And again, like you pointed out, there may be somebody out there that's got the answers to something all figured out all by themselves, just doing some notes in their basement. Michael Shermer talks about he gets emails from people all the time who've got Einstein disproved,
No, right, right. Yeah.
right? And is it impossible? No.
Yeah, no, yeah, no.
Is it improbable? Yes.
Yeah, yes, yeah.
So,
No,
just
it could happen, but yeah,
right, anything's possible. And like they say, the classic Back to the Future when Doc said he got his great realization when he thumped his head, right?
yeah.
On the flux capacitor, right?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So,
The
mate, it's
Eureka.
possible. Yeah, you have a dream or something, maybe you wake up and you go, I got the cure
Yeah,
to cancer. Hey, that's great. That's great. But you can't just think because you work for an organization that's willing to publish your materials when everybody else is discrediting your materials. Maybe, you
maybe you need
humble
to do some
yourself a little bit.
self-reflection. Yeah,
Exactly. That's the word I was looking for. Exactly. And like I said, if you think you're right, pursue it.
right,
Get the data, right? Prove yourself right.
right. But don't
And
be
good for
don't
you.
yeah, but don't be uh disappointed if it turns out that the data doesn't fit your idea.
And understand there's a lot of disappointed scientists,
Oh yeah, yeah.
and that the bulk of our scientific knowledge comes from everybody trying things and going, nope, that ain't it.
Right. Yeah. Lots of failures out, but that's how science progresses.
Right.
You don't figure something out by getting it right all the time.
And that's fine. You
Yeah.
know, that doesn't mean you failed as a scientist. You succeeded as a scientist.
Right. I mean, you could
Even
say,
if you disproved yourself, that
right.
goes
Like
into the body. That goes into the body of information. So the next guy says, "Well, hey, yeah, Andrew already disproved this."
right. It's definitely not X, so maybe it's Y.
Right. So go looking for why.
Yeah.
Enough people have examined X, you know,
Right. Like
and
it's not constantly repeating things over. And I guess if someone had the energy and time, they could do that for a while. But like, what's the point in that? Like, you have to build off your knowledge at some point and move beyond.
well, and like you said, peer review isn't perfect, but that's what peer
Right.
review is for.
Yeah.
And the idea again where maybe it's either the misinformation or the poor education, but peer review doesn't mean because you don't like something, your opinion matters.
Right.
Peer review means you actually said, well, hey, I mixed these chemicals together and it didn't turn blue.
Right.
And then I did it again. It didn't turn blue. This person is claiming if you mix these chemicals together, it turns blue and it doesn't.
Right.
That's peer review.
Right. That's a good point. Like, well, some of them they claim, well, we got these papers published, and is often in just an obscure or even worse, predatory journal. But just getting it
Or
published
Ken
doesn't mean,
Ham's own. Ken Ham has his
yeah,
own journal
his
now.
blog, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, just getting it published doesn't automatically mean it's right. Like you said, like someone can just come along and say, this looks fishy to me. I'm gonna try and do this over again. Nope, it doesn't seem like they were right about this. So that often happens, and it's a shame that retraction of journal papers and uh, that isn't talked about as much as I guess it doesn't make as good of a headline as scientists found a new species of or this new discovery. Like you were saying, just finding out you were wrong about something is just as critical as finding something new. That's just the process of science.
And it's the big window for the misinformation.
Yeah, unfortunately. Just it would be good to put that so that there's a bit more context. You know what I mean?
Well, and it's easy to put blame out.
Right.
And
Yeah, that's
one of the
true.
big targets is well, the public schools and everything. And it's like, look, I went to public schools. We had science classes. We had biology classes. We had a really cool teacher in eighth grade that was taxidermist. So his whole
Oh,
classroom was
cool.
filled with all the animals and everything.
That sounds cool.
Kids in the morning would bring in roadkill, and he was putting them in jars of formaldehyde.
Oh.
And it was like it was cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it may be the nerdy or the geeky thing to say, but it nerdy geeky is just another way of picking on the smart kids as far as I'm concerned,
Right, right.
because
Yeah, yeah,
just
exactly.
because yeah just because you're interested in science doesn't mean it's not equally as interesting as climbing a mountain or playing football
Right.
or
Or
something.
or fixing cars or whatnot. Yeah.
Sure. you know
No offense to people who fix cars because that's still important,
i i
obviously.
I bent a lot of wrenches back in my day. I was ASE certified for a number of years.
Oh, cool.
And yeah, always be nice to your mechanic. He's had a rough day working on getting your
Right. Yeah.
rusty bolts loose.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like I was cable guy for a while too.
Oh,
And
okay.
the cable guy jokes just don't play anymore because it's like, hey, that was the toughest job I ever had. You try wiring up something on a 30-foot ladder in the middle of winter with everything blowing around and your
Right. Yeah.
hands are too cold, and you can't do fittings on coax cable with gloves on.
Right.
So, and carrying those rolls of cable around, and oh gee, that's a tough job. So yeah,
Yeah.
respect these people. I mean, give people, try to put yourself in their position for a minute. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
And ask yourself, hey, when I went to do something, it didn't quite go as planned, and yeah, maybe it took another hour, another day to get it done. These things happen. It's not necessarily the person's fault.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
All right. Well, I think this is a good place to wrap it up, my friend.
Yeah,
It
I
was a
think
good
so. This has been
discussion.
a good discussion. Yeah.
Yeah,
Thanks
I was
for
glad.
letting me come on and talk with you.
Well, yeah, I was glad you wanted to and everything. Our other discussions before and everything. I always want to tell everybody Andrew's always a great guy to talk to. He's polite, he's
Thanks.
civil, and he's informative. And yeah, like I said, if you spot him somewhere, give him a listen, because I always enjoy listening to Andrew and what he's got to say.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, and I look forward to any future discussions we may have. That'd be maybe we could get some other people on. We could have a good, nice discussion. We'll see how that turns out.
Yeah, that would be great. Like I said, I'm just starting out. I've only had my channel since the late spring or so. I'm a critic, and it's easy to be a critic. So I
Yeah.
said, well, I better put my money where my mouth is and make a few
Yeah.
videos of my own so people could critique me back. And
Yeah.
I'm always open to being criticized. I don't take offense. If I said something wrong, correct me. I don't want to be wrong.
Yeah.
And I'm always ready to learn things. And if there's something I might have missed from the creationists, especially anti-science in general,
Yeah.
any of those things, hey, feel free to tell me. But from my viewpoint, and I think Andrew's viewpoint, is that you're not refuting these things with anything that's worth anything. You're basically
Right.
just saying, I don't like it because of
X, Y,
whatever
Z.
reason.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. Well, my dogs are going crazy in the background, so now would
I hear
probably
him.
be a good time
I hear him.
to
All right.
wrap it up.
All right. Well, you have a good night, and
Yep.
I hope to talk to you again soon. And
All right.
everybody else, have a good night. If you like this
Goodbye, everyone.
conversation, please give me a like and a subscribe and share it. And everybody have a good night and a good week.